Hi guys and welcome back to another video. My name is Shah and this is Thoroughly Enjoyed Books. In today's video I'm going to wrap up all of the books that I read in the month of February. I managed to read 5 books, which isn't fantastic, but as I have previously mentioned, I had quite a chaotic February and I just couldn't concentrate while I was sat at home with my family. I was spending so much time with them that I just couldn't focus on reading. But I am in the middle of quite a few books as well, so I'm going to go through the books that I have finished and then I'm going to talk about the books that I'm currently reading, just so that you know kind of what's to come in March. I have got a TBR coming for March. That's going to be up on Friday. However, that is going to be a very chaotic TBR because I'm taking part in so many readathons in March that it's kind of insane. I don't think I'm going to be able to manage. I also have deadlines for uni. It's a lot. So of the 5 books that I did manage to read this month, 4 of them are physical books, and as you can see they're all quite short, and one of them was a audiobook, and it was the first audiobook that I'd listened to in quite a while. So let's dive right into the books I read. First of all, I read Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. As you can see by all these pretty little tabs, this is a book that I had to read for university. I'm doing my last literature module at university. It's crazy, and it is on 21st century literature, so it's all pretty recent, and this book was on that list. It was also a gift from the lovely Shannon from 155 Books, so go check her out as well. This book follows a young girl called Sylvie, whose father is really into not even historical reenactment, but kind of like the past. He kind of wants a pure Britain, a pure white man's Britain. He's obsessed with history and historical accuracy, and the family embark on a kind of like archaeological reenactment type dig kind of thing. So they go along to this university dig, and the father becomes very obsessed and somehow leads everyone else to be as obsessed as he is about this dig. And it's a very interesting book. It looks at boundaries and blurring between past and future. According to my professor, this had a lot to do with Brexit. I didn't really pick up on any of that, but at the same time I also didn't really enjoy this book. It's very short. I did get it selected as the book club pick for my in real life book club, and nobody liked it. That was a good choice. So I don't really have too much to say about this book because I just didn't really like it. I thought it was very black and white in terms of its morals and its depiction of genders, and I don't think it really went any deeper than that. And I think the Brexit message is kind of subtle, and everyone in my class really needed to be told about it, so I'm not quite sure it did what it set out to do. I also have heard a lot of people on BookTube love this book. I know Sarah Moss is quite popular. I think Jen Campbell really enjoys her. Mercedes I think also enjoys her, and several others you know, of those kind of literary readers on BookTube really like her. But I didn't like this one, and I might try another Sarah Moss book at another date. I just did not think that this was the one. I personally didn't enjoy it, and I think there are other books that do this a lot better. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but they're out there. Yeah, it just didn't really leave an impression on me, and it's not one that I think I will ever recommend or come back to. So that was quite disappointing. I hoped that there'd be a bit more excitement, kind of like a bit more history involved, rather than it just being this one man's perception of history kind of being imposed on everyone else. I don't think a lot of the characters were very fleshed out. I think it tried to do a lot in a little and didn't really pull it off. Overall, quite disappointed by this one, but as you can see I did have a lot of tabs, so if I was to write an essay on this, there's stuff I could talk about, but I'm just not very inclined to. The next book that I read is She Must Be Mad by Charlie Cox. This is a collection of poetry and I really enjoyed this one. This is very similar to the kind of poetry that I write, and it's the kind of poetry that I like to read about, and that is poetry that looks a lot at human emotion, human relationships, feeling, and what it's like to be a woman who has a lot of feelings and to go through heartbreak and to suffer with mental health conditions and just the difficulties that life throws at you. Charlie Cox has a lot of different types of poetry in this book. So some of her poems are quite long, maybe a page, a couple of pages, and then some are really short, maybe a few lines, and some of them are in prose, so they're just kind of a story kind of told in a rhythm. Others are very poetic, some of these are very metaphorical, and there was just a nice mix in here and I really enjoyed it. And it was actually this collection and reading this collection that made me decide that I wanted to share my poetry collection. If you're not aware, I am currently working on a poetry collection that is due out in May. I had originally intended to get it out in April, however, because of some lovely crowdfunding, I have a Ko-fi where I have been raising money to actually print it and maybe get some art design in there, and I have an artist who I've commissioned for some work, so I'll leave the information to that down below if you're interested. And I've posted some of the poems on my blog, so you have kind of an idea of what sort of poems are going to be included in there and what it's about. And this was kind of the inspiration that made me think, yeah, I want to share this. So everyone who donates to that is going to get a free ebook copy once I have finalised it all and got it all sorted, and I'm really excited about it. So that's coming out in May. But back on track, this is just a very personal collection. Charlie Cox is someone who's been very open and honest about her experience with her mental health. I believe she has a codependent personality disorder as well, and she does have a non-fiction book where she goes into her codependency. There's a lot of very personal things in here. There's some poetry about sex and her personal relationships that really look deep into her spirit and how she's feeling. And you know, I cried a couple of times while reading this, and I just really enjoyed it and related to a lot of the poems, particularly the ones talking about her mental health and feeling a little bit crazy and derailed. So I really recommend this one if you like that kind of poetry. And I do want to pick up some more of Charlie Cox's work, either some more poetry or her non-fiction book. This month as well, I also hosted the Wilsothon. I did really badly. I didn't read as much as I wanted to. I had 4 books in my TBR video and I thought that would be fine. It wasn't. I managed to read one of those, 1.5. I haven't finished the other half of the half that I had read, but the one that I did manage to read was Kiss by Jacqueline Wilson. This is one of my favourite Jacqueline Wilson books, and I read it a long time ago when it first came out, and it came out in 2007, so I was 13. I might have actually been 12. It depends when in that year I read it. It's very shiny and I don't know where to hold it. This book basically follows, again, Sylvie. We had 2 Sylvies this month, who is in love with her best friend Carl. He just isn't interested in her whatsoever, and it kind of looks at their relationship as they're growing older. They've gone to different high schools, they don't really see each other anymore, and Sylvie has pretended that Carl is her boyfriend to fit in, and then that's obviously not the case, and it just looks at their relationship deteriorating. What is the case with this? Why doesn't Carl love her? And it looks at queerness, it looks at sexuality in young teens, it looks at drugs and the use of alcohol to kind of be cool. There's a lot in this book, and there was a lot more than I actually remembered, and it's very problematic at times. It's also quite interesting, and it's also very mature at times. So one of the things I've learned about Jacqueline Wilson over the Wilsothon was that she uses very real situations. And I've always known that about her. Her books, make me a socialist. Her books look at working class issues, but they also use language that wouldn't be acceptable. And sometimes you're not quite sure what the purpose of that in here is. It doesn't necessarily feel like things are challenged. It just kind of depicts it as this is a way that people talk and leaves it at that. So Sylvie's mother begins to date a man who has a disability, and I'm not sure on some of the language used. It's very positive, it demonstrates that because of he's no different than anyone else because of his disability, but it does use a few choices that I'm not quite sure whether those should be used in that way. And it also discusses sex and relationships in teenagers, sometimes in ways that I'm just not quite 100% comfortable with. Something that Caris brought up in her reading vlog for the Wilsothon is that Jacqueline Wilson uses the word fingering a lot, and it's not in a sexual connotation. And I noticed that with this book, and now every time I pick up a Jacqueline Wilson book I can't help but notice the word fingering. I enjoyed this one. Like I said, I'm not 100% sure how I feel, and I think a few of us have noticed that the way that things are depicted in Jacqueline Wilson books might not be completely okay, but it definitely gives you something to think about. I then also, of course, read the Books About Bipolar book pick of the month, which was Marbles by Ellen Forney. I'm not going to talk about this one too much here because I do have a live show with Shannon from 155 Books where we went into depth talking about this. It's about an hour long, so I'll leave a link to that up here and down below if you want to go and check that out. This is basically a graphic memoir. It is Ellen Forney's experience of being diagnosed with bipolar disorder and her journey with medication and how it potentially affected her creativity, and also the links between bipolar disorder and creativity, which are very real. What I loved about this book is that it really depicts like the bipolar mind. So we have these kind of mind maps where Ellen Forney is describing a thought and it's all so messy, and then how she goes through different parts of her life, and some of it is more ordered and some of it is more chaotic and some of it's more artistic. And she also explores different medications and talks about what it's like being on different medications. And as someone with bipolar disorder myself, who isn't medicated and is quite reluctant to go on medication because of things I've heard and how difficult it is, this was quite difficult to read because it kind of reaffirmed my thoughts on medication. It seemed almost anti-medication until it got to a point where it was very for medication. It's quite difficult to say how I felt about that because I have a lot of thoughts about that, which I go into a bit more in the live show, because I think I just had a lot of mixed opinions on this one. And I think a lot of it's to do with who is this for? Is this necessarily for a reader, or was this just for Ellen's own state of mind? Was she just writing it for herself? And I think when you think about it like that, your opinion on it can change a lot. It's one that I am happy I read. It's one that has given me a lot to think about. It's also one that I've come away with some quite complex and not entirely positive thoughts on. And the last book that I read in its entirety this month was I Never Said I Loved You by Rick Samada. This is a memoir that I listened to that was narrated by Rick Samada, all about his mental health and his experiences that maybe disadvantaged him, such as his relationship with his parents, such as his race, his ethnicity, and just some of the adverse childhood experiences he went through as a child. And it was a difficult listen. I listened to this because I'm working on a video that I'm putting on hold for now because I don't think I'm quite in the mindset to do it. And if this book is anything to go by, that's, you know, evidence of that. But this has 10 chapters that explore a different aspect kind of Rick Samada's life and how his mental health through those periods of time kind of shaped who he is. So there are chapters on his work, his university, breakups, his family. There's a lot of sexual assault in here, particularly child sexual assault, which was very difficult to listen to. I find it really hard to review memoirs anyway because you're kind of reviewing somebody's life. And there were parts of this book that made me absolutely weep. There was a section on how to lose somebody and how to move on. There was a part where I just cried my eyes out for a solid hour. Some of the things that he said, and I'll go into more detail in the video that I do plan on doing in the future, that just were absolutely heart-wrenching. And a lot about how men just can't facilitate their emotions. It's difficult for men to express their feelings because they're kind of always told to keep them in and to not discuss things and not feel things and repress them. And you definitely see that in this book, and I have some quotes and stuff picked out for my future video. But there were other times in this book where I just didn't care what he was talking about. So there were sections where he was talking about his experiences at drama school and trying to get into acting and failing and how that affected his mental health. And I found at those parts I kind of tuned out, which sounds awful because obviously that affected him in a lot of ways, but I was more interested in kind of how his relationships affected his mental health and how did his depression and his anxiety stop him forming meaningful relationships with women and get in the way of loving people, really. That was something that I was really fascinated by. I had very mixed opinions on this book as well. I'm glad I listened to it. I don't think I'd have finished it if I hadn't been listening to it on audiobook, just because, like I said, there was parts that were quite difficult for me to get through because I just wasn't interested in that specific thing. But there were 2 chapters that I adored and would listen over and over and over again, and I just kind of wish it was maybe a bit more condensed to those specific things, rather than this whole encompassing book about things I didn't care about. So those are all of the 5 books that I did read in February. Now I have 3 that I'm currently in the middle of. I actually have 4, because one of those I started in January but I didn't pick up at all in February, and that is The Nowhere Girls by Amy Reed. I just decided I wasn't in the right state of mind to read a book that is so heavily about sexual assault towards women. I've put that one on hold for a little bit. I'm about 100 pages in and I will come back to it at some point, just not right now. The other one, again, I don't know if I actually did pick it up in February at all, but I've been reading it since January, and it is Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory by Raphael Bob Waxberg, which is a collection of short stories about relationships and dating and breakups, and it's kind of obvious why I haven't got through this one yet, but I do want to get through it in March, and it does kind of fit into some of the readathons that I'll be doing, so I will get to this one at some point. And the last 2 books I'm currently in the middle of are both books that I'm reading for university. So the first of those is Wilsothon by Kay Miller. As you can see, I have tabbed a lot of this, so I'm a good way through this. I think I only have like 70 pages left of this book. I just didn't get around to finishing it by the time my seminar came around, and then after the seminar I had to move on to the next book. So I'm going to come back to this because I'm considering writing my essay on this. But this is basically about a young boy who lives in Jamaica, and one day he gets his locks cut off by his teacher because of some of the class and racial religious issues in Jamaica, and his grandmother is telling him the story of Bedwood, who was a Jamaican priest. And without going into too much detail, this just looks at the landscape of Jamaica, how it's changed, how there's a lot of trauma in the land and the people of Jamaica, and how it's not this beautiful resort that a lot of white travellers make it out to be. You know, there's a lot of historical context in Jamaica, and it's quite, you know, a rough area to live in. It's quite a difficult place with a lot of damage happening to it. And Kay Miller is Jamaican himself. He grew up nearby Wilsothon, which is a real place in Jamaica. This is a fictionalized version of that place, and I just think that this is such a fascinating and beautifully written book, and it's given voices to people in Jamaica who maybe haven't been given those voices before. So like I said, about 70 pages left of this. Hopefully you'll get this one finished pretty soon, but I was really enjoying it. It was just a case of the week leading up to my seminar for this book was chaotic. And then the last one is one I have just started, and the seminar for this is this coming Friday, and that is Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli. I read about 150 pages of this one last night, or throughout Sunday, doing reading sprints, so I'm definitely going to be doing a few more of those after I finish work. I'm really enjoying this one. This is basically about the crisis, the scandal of the children at the Mexican border being put into cages, being taken away from their parents, what exactly is going on. This is Own Voices. Valeria Luiselli is a Mexican author. I think this one deserves a lot more praise and a lot more recognition and a lot more circulation than American Dirt, which is a white person writing this story. This so far is absolutely fascinating. I am reading it and I'm just in awe. It's about archives and documentation and, you know, why these things are happening. I'm at a bit that I'm a bit slogging through at the minute, that I'm not really interested in what's happening, so there are dips. It's only 350 pages, so it's not the longest book, but it feels long. It's quite dense. There's a lot going on, but hopefully I'll be getting this one finished this month. I will be getting this one finished in March, so I'll be reviewing this really soon. So here are all the books that I read or I'm currently reading from February. Let me know in the comments down below if you have read any of these books, and if you have, what did you think of them? Did you have similar opinions to me? Am I completely off the mark and you had a completely different experience? Please do let me know. As usual, down below I will leave links to my Twitter and my Storygraph and all that good stuff. Come and follow me on them and talk to me about books, and I can't wait to see you in another video very, very soon. Take care now. Bye.